Hi, thank you all for coming today. We're planning to talk about some copyright and plagiarism issues in dealing with thesis and dissertations. As we go through today, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand and let us know. It's okay to interrupt us. We'll also have a question section kind of at the end. The issues of copyright and plagiarism are very hot topics right now, and especially in the graduate school. So our policies tend to change a lot of times on a day-to-day, sometimes a week-to-week basis. So always call our office and ask us if you have specific questions before you start dealing with any of these issues, and we can give you the most up-to-date information.
Okay, so we're going to start out with some basics about copyright. So a piece of work, a poem that you wrote, an article, your abstract, is copyrighted essentially from the moment that you create it. Typically, when people talk about registering copyright, they're talking about officially registering their copyright with the US government. But even if that doesn't happen, it is still copyrighted. So filing a copyright is something that helps give you legal standing in court if at some point in time there's any kind of dispute over a piece of material. Like, for instance, let's say that you wrote something for a paper in a class, and you have a colleague or a fellow student in a lab, and maybe they used it for something else that they were doing because you guys are working on a similar project together. So really, unless both of your names are on, let's say, that abstract or whatever, it could be considered plagiarism or a copyright infringement when the other person uses it because it's yours, because you created it. So one of the things with thesis and dissertations, there's an option to copyright your thesis or dissertation. Typically, we don't recommend that students copyright their thesis or dissertation unless it's an original work of some sort, and typically those are students in the fine arts, poetry, drama, theater, creative writing, etc. Or if you created something original and might have a patent or something like that, and that can vary from program to program and kind of depending on what you're working on. But we always advise that if you're thinking about doing copyright or you have questions, definitely first talk with your committee and your department, because your committee or your advisor may have a specific way they want you to do something, or they just may have more information about the topic or the project that you're working on. So definitely when you have questions about that thing, about your project, definitely talk with your committee and talk with your department. Graduate school policies on using copyrighted material are that you have to have permission from the copyright holder. So you know if something is copyrighted because usually if it's an image or something else, there'll be the C surrounded by a circle, which means copyrighted with the year and other information. So if you have to get permission to use copyrighted material, the graduate school does require that you include that permission, the documentation of your permission, in the appendix of your thesis or dissertation to verify that. Something else when getting permission you have to think about is who owns the copyright. Just because the person who created it, that they created it, doesn't necessarily mean that they own the copyright. An example of this is if you're publishing an article in a journal. When you sign that contract or sign the agreement with that journal, it may be that the journal now owns the copyright to that article and not you. It varies from journal to journal and from discipline to discipline. We have so many different programs on this campus, and they have a really wide range. There are different practices, in each discipline. But read that agreement or contract that you sign carefully, because it may be that the journal now owns your copyright. In most cases, journals are okay with students using an article as part of their thesis or dissertation or for another educational purpose. There are a lot of materials that I'm sure you guys as students and as graduate students have seen that say it has copyright and then it says okay for educational purposes. That would be an instance of it being okay for educational purposes. But that's definitely something that you want to look at when you're submitting articles to journals or any other kind of publication, including your thesis and dissertation, is do I retain the copyright to my own work? If you're doing and that also applies if you're doing a co-authored article or a co-authored project, just make sure that you read that fine print clearly and know if it's you or if it's someone else, or if it's only the first author on that co-authored work, or something of that nature, because it's really important. And also, as you move into your career, depending if you go into academia or other things, and it's entirely possible that you're probably going to want to use your publications for various things, presentations or other things like that. So it's just, you just really want to make sure that you read your contract, read that agreement, so that you know what you're agreeing to and know what your rights are in regards to your own published work.
So when you're writing your dissertation or your thesis and you're wanting to use someone else's copyrighted work, there is something called educational fair use. That typically, if you're just using a small portion or maybe a chart or a graph, it all depends on how large. There's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts about fair use. How much you can use in your paper without getting permission for the copyright. We suggest if you're using more than 2 charts or graphs out of any given publication, or more than 1 or 2 or probably more than 2 large quotes, that you get permission from the copyright holder to put that information in your thesis or dissertation. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out who the copyright holder is. The easiest place to start is with the publisher of that document. So if you call up the publisher, ask them, do you own the copyright or does the author? If the author does, say, do you have their contact information, an email address or something where we can email them? When they give you permission, whether they say it's, oh, you can go, the permission's on our website, or they send you an email with permission, that actually gets included in your thesis or dissertation. In your appendices.
Yeah. Also, the university library has some really great resources on their website in regards to fair use and educational fair use and copyright issues. And so they have something that's called a fair use checklist. So maybe you've used like 2 or 3 figures, but there's a lot of stuff, so you're not really sure where you fall on that spectrum. So they have something that's called a fair use checklist, and so it kind of asks you a couple different questions to kind of help you figure that out. But the university library has, their website has a section that's really thorough about addressing all of these things, and takes you some resources outside of the university. And it's just always something to look at if you're not sure, because like I was always taught, it's better to oversight than to undersight. So if you're not sure, include it, because you can get in trouble for not including it. You can't get in trouble for including something you don't need. And so that's, in general, kind of my policy, the way I go. Like, if I'm not sure, I'm like, why don't we just go ahead and put it in there? Because that way, I know that my bases are covered. I know that I have nothing to worry about, because if anybody has any questions, everything's in there. And so that's just usually what I tell students. Like, if you're not sure and you can't get a straight answer from your committee or from the publisher or from whoever it is, go ahead and include it, because too much is better than not enough.
And a lot of students feel that adding this permission to their thesis or dissertation is a little bit of overkill, but the reason we ask you to do it is if the publisher or their author changes their mind tomorrow. So you have a screenshot of them giving you permission, and it's in your paper. So if you ever need that, you can always go back to ProQuest Publishing, where your paper is going to be, and you can show them, on this date, you gave me permission. Because the last thing we want is someone coming to you 10 years from now and saying, we're going to sue you for copyright infringement because you used our material. Then boom, right there you can say, on this date you gave me permission to use this. And
that has happened at colleges and universities in the US.
Luckily not here.
Not at the University of Arkansas, thank goodness. But in our conferences that we discuss with our colleagues at other colleges and universities that work with theses and dissertations, we talk about issues that graduate students face, across the country, which in general are, fairly similar. And that was one of the issues that came up. Is there was a school that they had someone who contacted them, and it was years later, and it was like, I believe, the son of the person who actually owned the copyrighted material, but they were a lawyer and they threatened to sue unless students removed the information. And it got kind of messy for a while. Nothing like that has ever happened at the U of A, to the best of my knowledge, not in the last several years at least, since I've been here. But we would like to avoid that for both students and the university, if at all possible.
And if something like that ever happens to you, 10 years after you've graduated, contact the grad school so we can get involved and help you with that too, because you shouldn't have to go on that alone. So is there anybody that has any questions about copyright before we move into the plagiarism issues? We know this has got to be some deep information.
When they say an idea is copyrighted, because as students we read a lot of stuff, and then years later we can probably call back the information. So if you're like using an idea, but you know that you read that idea somewhere else, but you just don't remember where you read it from, should you look for that information to then add into your thesis?
Ken, how do you feel about that?
It's kind of what I was.
Yeah, Ken Vickers is a professor in micro EP on campus, and so I feel like you might have an opinion about this because.
Okay, so early in your graduate career, you read a paper and an idea sticks with you, but you didn't document that. And 5 years later, you're writing your dissertation, and you still have the same idea, and you know it came from somewhere, but you have no idea where. Well, you have an ethical obligation to find where it originated or not use it. I mean, it's the easy first answer because you know it's somebody else's idea. And that would, you need to be citing them. So we're moving away from plagiarism. You probably don't remember their exact words, but you know it's somebody else's idea. And so you can probably retrace your steps, but I don't know where everybody else is.
Well, and I was going to say, I would think too that by the time you're writing your thesis or dissertation, the majority of them require a literature review. So theoretically, at some point, if you have a topic, you're going to come across it again, depending on how narrow or wide your scope is. Because if you have an idea and you're doing research based off of that, so when you're doing your literature review and looking for other materials about that, I would think it would probably be possible that you may come across it again.
Probably would, but the other thing I was going to say is no matter where you are right now in your process, whenever you read an article, capture it. Capture,
Good point.
Yeah.
This is probably the only time I'll tell you to cut and paste, but cut and paste the abstract into a Word document. Make sure you get the full citation, and then make yourself notes of what you found important. And it may just be a little smidgen, but make yourself a note up front, and you can word search your document.
Well, and in the same way that most students probably, they keep their textbooks, they keep the articles that they got as assignments or that their professor suggested they read, and you have your old papers with, your old references sections, etc. So, yeah, Ken.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Ken is very right. Like, you definitely should keep stuff when possible. Deborah?
And the citation manages that library.
Yes.
Are very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
They know exact words.
But I would also suggest that if you have a topic like this, to also utilize your peers in your department along with your professors. Because I noticed a student who I'm friends with on Facebook this week who posted, I know I saw this number from this watershed somewhere. Can somebody tell me if they remember from what article I may have read that from? So utilize the other people in your department that may also be doing that same research.
If you are going to pull stuff from the internet, we're getting a little bit light here, but make sure you capture the date that you accessed it, because the web is fluid. And just because you saw it, it's kind of like you're saying.
Yeah, with the copyright, if someone decides to reinstate a copyright and then you have the date that they gave you permission, exactly like what Ken was talking about, what Doreen was saying, especially on the web, things change all the time, and so having that date helps verify.
Does everybody know what I stumbled across by accident just a couple of years ago? If you do a save as a web page, save it as an archive. It's a ARC or something designation. When you do save as, the default saves it with live links, but there is an archive designation that saves it as a fixed dead page. And so if you're getting stuff off the internet, not only capture the date, but do a save as an archive. One of you that's got your computers open and pull up a web page and see, you see what I'm talking about.
That's a really good.
Yeah.
Any other questions about copyright before we move on?
And we'll have questions at the end too, if anyone thinks of something between now and then.
The only comment I would make on fair use, and y'all have already mentioned it, it's going to vary dramatically across disciplines. In the sciences, if a figure is illustrating data or information, that is not nearly as sensitive as reproducing an artwork or somebody's poetry, because that is a complete work in itself, whereas a figure is just a demonstration of information.
Yeah, so definitely on the fair use, again, talk to your committee, talk to your department, because it does vary within discipline and across campus because we have so many different disciplines. Also, whatever style guide that your program uses, that hopefully should have, you know, some information in there.
But don't forget to utilize the librarians. They have great knowledge, and a lot of students don't realize that our librarians really know a lot about these topics.
Yeah.
They're generally conservative.
Yes.
They're generally trying to make sure you err on the side of caution.
Exactly.
Instead of erring on the side of don't worry about it.
Plagiarism. You would not believe the number of students that come into our office to get their thesis or dissertation checked for their final submission. When you say plagiarism, they say, "What is that?" Most students do learn this even at the high school and undergraduate level, but it's becoming more and more of an issue that students really aren't aware of plagiarism even when they're doing a thesis or dissertation. Webster's dictionary says that plagiarism is an act or instance of using or closely imitating the language and thoughts of another author without authorization, and the representation of that author's work is one's own, as by not crediting the original author. In an academic setting, there is never an instance that you have a quote that it should not be cited. At the top, especially with a lot of the arts, we see someone puts a quote by Sir Isaac Newton at the top of their paper. They don't cite that quote. It has to be cited, even if it's common. Even if it's a common quote that you hear every day, it's still, you have to have a citation to it, and you have to have a reference in your reference section. That's one of the major major things that are important, can't speak today, that you pick a style guide before you start writing your paper. Some departments, some areas have very strict style guides. They tell you to use MLA, APA, Chicago. I know in some of the sciences, they tend to go to some different journal citation styles. So pick a citation style and stay with it. When we talk about a style guide, that's what we're talking about. MLA, Chicago, APA, there's 100 of them. In that, it will tell you how you need to cite, how you need to set up your references. But another issue that's a hot topic right now, and it's such a hot topic, it is just now included in the APA manual, in the 6th edition of the APA manual, and that is self-plagiarism. It is very possible to plagiarize yourself. Yeah, that's a thought that's way out there. But if you have ever written a paper for a class, and you have a second class that you want to, take that paper and turn it in again, that's considered self-plagiarism. And the professors on this campus will turn you in for academic integrity for doing something like that. So always be really careful. Now you have Class A, you've written this paper, and you kind of want to do a paper on the same subject on Class B. You can cite yourself from that first paper. And you would cite yourself just like you would cite any other journal article, any other publication, because you published that for a grade for a class. It may not be out on the web, it may not be in a book as a published, but you published it. The APA style guide, the 6-point version, it's saying that self-plagiarism refers to the practice of presenting one's own previously published work as something new. The core of the new document must consist of an original contribution to knowledge, and only the amount of previously published materials necessary to understand that contribution should be included, primarily in the discussion of theory and methodology. That's Rule 6.02, and it's actually found on page 170 and page 16. So you'll probably there should be a little bit more in the style guide. So even if your style guide doesn't say something about self-plagiarism, you probably want to go and read those sections. Yes, ma'am.
What happens, say, if I have written a manuscript and on a totally different topic than my dissertation,
Yes.
and it is not yet published? Like
Okay.
I submitted to a journal, it gets rejected, but I haven't resubmitted it to any other journal. And in my dissertation, I'm writing another manuscript which involves very similar work, and I'm And in the results and discussion, mainly what happens is it's taking exactly the same flow. So can I use those words in my dissertation?
No. No, you cannot.
Change that.
You can cite, but when you start citing paragraphs, that's not creating new knowledge. That's copying and pasting from your first journal article into your dissertation. Even if it's not published, it's the same thing as 2 classes. It's 2 journal articles. It has to be completely original work. Now you can do a sentence or something and do a citation on it, but you can't just copy and paste over whole sections.
Change the other manuscript, like change the words or like rewrite the first manuscript that I created in case I want to.
Correct. Yeah. I know this gets really tricky, and this can be a yucky topic.
Okay, let me make sure I understand.
Yes, sir.
By the way, I'm learning stuff here today on this topic because it's getting messy. As I understand, you submitted a journal article and it was rejected, correct? And you're not altering it and resubmitting it to the journal. It's just a bit. So why would that be considered unavailable for her to use somewhere else? Because it isn't in the public domain. It's not been used anywhere in the public domain. It was rejected. So I would have said that's fine to submit to another journal without any.
Well, yes, submit to another journal, but not include large portions of it in her dissertation.
Okay, that's a totally different.
She could take that article that was just rejected and submit it to another journal.
Let me wait to hear the rest, to finish learning, and then I'd like to come back to that.
Yes.
Difficulty of using journal articles in your dissertation or thesis.
Yes. The graduate school policy is that unless you are using what we call the published papers format, which is where you take articles that are either ready for publication or have already been published, and you include them as a whole in your thesis or dissertation, that is the only way you can use, like the journal article that you had rejected, you can use it all in your paper or none. You would use it as a whole section.
But in my case, like the article that got rejected, it is not a part of my dissertation. It's from like completely different works. So
Yes. Then you would treat it in our reading of the definition, which this is something new to us, and it can constantly change. But our rule of our view of the definition is that you can cite yourself just like you would any other article that was out there and use pieces of it. You would treat it the same way. Like you wouldn't copy and paste out of his article to put in your dissertation, so you can't really do that with your own journal. It's rough. It really is rough.
Okay, so we're going to talk about one more thing, which is sort of plagiarism, academic dishonesty, integrity related, and then we'll go back to questions, and I think Ken wants some more in depth. Okay, so for doctoral students, you cannot call yourself doctor until your degree has been awarded. On your resume, on anything. You can't put ABD, you can't put PhDC, like for candidate. It does not exist on this campus. And if someone called, let's say Doreen submitted a resume somewhere and she put PhD, she thinks she's gonna finish the semester, and so she puts it on her resume, and they called to verify that she was indeed a PhD. We as a graduate school can't answer questions like that. We have to send them to the registrar's office, and the registrar's office has to send them to a third party. However, the answer is no, because you haven't been awarded your degree.
Question.
Hold on. Hang. No.
That's the
No,
next.
because as certain information is public. So if you've received, we're a public university, so if you've received a degree on this campus, it's public information. So if someone says, have they received a degree, and they have, okay, but it's a yes or no. There's no in between. So as far as like the ABD or PhD.
For the ones of you who don't know, ABD is all but dissertation.
Yeah,
That's what that
sorry.
means.
Yeah. So I mean, you can say that, but if it's something that would have to be verified by the U of A, can't be verified.
Can you say doctoral candidate?
Yes,
Yes.
you can say doctoral candidate because that's what you are.
You can say
But-
that if you pass your candidacy exam.
Yes.
Yes, you can say that if you passed your candidacy exam, correct.
But the university as a whole does not use the initials ABD.
Yeah.
But it's just not a standard on our
So
campus.
also something to remember is, so the date of graduation for a given semester is the official end of the semester commencement. So for instance, for spring 2014, that date is May 10th. So if you submitted your dissertation and completed all your coursework, etc., you would think that you can call yourself doctor after, let's say, May 11th. Technically, you can. However, something to be aware of is that degrees aren't posted on transcripts for 6 to 8 weeks after the date of graduation. So again, if you have to send a transcript for another program, for a fellowship, internship, job, etc., you want to wait until your degree is posted. That also goes for master's students. Same thing. Degree's not posted for 6 or 8 weeks after. So when you contact the registrar's office, something you can do is say you want your transcript held for degree posting, and what that means is they won't send out your transcript until your degree is posted. So you can request to have 3 sent out, one to you, one to your future potential employer, and one to your parents, so they'll give you a prize or something.
And
But-
if you still have your ISIS access, you should be able to look at your unofficial transcript, and it'll show you on that transcript that when the degree is actually awarded.
Yes.
Because the only notification you get is the mailing of the diploma. Your degree could actually be on there a week or 2 before you get the diploma in the mail. But if you ever need something for an employer before you get that diploma in the mail, let us know, and there's things that we can do to help
we do
work
have
with
options. Unfortunately, not all employers or everyone accepts them, but we do try and work with students as best we can, within our limitations.
you. Is there any questions? I know
Yes.
Ken has a bunch.
During-
For example, I got my master's from UP. I just noticed, just recently, because I put it up on my wall in my new little area, but the degree is not on there. It just says MS.
It's a Master of Science.
I can address that. There is, on this campus, there are different academic cultural traditions. Arts and Sciences issues Master of Science and Doctor of Philosophy, and the program is on the transcript. The College of Engineering issues a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering, a Master of Science in Chemical Engineering.
And that's the actual name of the
It has
degree.
the name in the title, but even at the doctoral level, they just do a PhD.
Doctor of Engineering,
in
Doctor of
engineering,
Philosophy and
Doctor of
Engineering.
But when we put together the interdisciplinary program, we had to choose one culture or another, and we went with the more traditional, original Master of Science and Doctor of Philosophy.
So sometimes when you're walking down the sidewalk, watch the initials at the end of people's names, because you'll see MS, you'll see MA, you'll see MPA, that's a Master of Public Administration. You'll see MSEE, Master of Science in Electrical Engineering. So you can kind of see the different disciplines, or if you know somebody, go look at their name that's in the degree you're getting, and you can see what yours is going to be.
Sorry. Didn't even make the
All right. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Okay, so is that only for PhD? So, like, I'm a master's student now, but I'm hoping to further my education at another institution, and so I'm not supposed to write, but have a master's degree because I'll be putting an application.
Well, okay, so that's a little bit different. When you're completing applications for another program, typically it's understood that it's possible you may still be enrolled in a program, and usually there's someplace on the application or something to, write your expected graduation date. Something that you can do as far as resume purposes and other things of that nature is say anticipated graduation date of spring 2014 or fall 2014. When you think that you'll be graduating and submitting your thesis. So that means that you think that you're going to finish it then, not guaranteeing. And depending on the field that you go into and different schools and jobs, some schools, they're totally fine with that. Like, you can be accepted to a PhD program without proof of having finished your master's, but you have to have proof to them within the end of your first semester, or something like that. And sometimes, depending on, the field that you're in as far as like job and like professional work. Sometimes they'll also do things like that because, again, if you need your transcript or your diploma, it won't be available, for probably at least a month after you finish. So sometimes they'll give you like a time period, like 90 days or even, a few months that you have to have that official documentation into them.
But most schools want an official transcript with degree confirmation on it.
Yeah.
They won't take a letter from your department or from your department head or even from a dean or even from the provost. They want, in the US, the most official thing that you can get about a degree isn't your diploma. It is the degree that's posted on that transcript.
By the way, when I received those resumes or applications as expected graduation May of 2014, and I know it doesn't apply to all of y'all in here because you're here showing good progressive thinking, you're here making things happen. But usually if it's May of 14, I automatically add a semester because we're all optimists, right?
Very true.
All right, does anybody have any questions before we talk about Ken's question, which I'm assuming is about using articles that have already been published?
Well,
Or submitted?
Yes, it's in the blog.
Okay.
I'll start by saying that I am 100% adamantly opposed to using a collection of articles for your dissertation. And I'll sort of explain that. The dissertation is where you give evidence and your master's thesis. It's where you give evidence of your ability to demonstrate what you've learned and your ability to communicate it. I mean, it truly is the master work and the old apprenticeship kind of things, and journeyman and the apprentice, journeyman, and master. So your thesis represents you, your dissertation represents you. Journal articles are primarily archival. It's to capture knowledge in a way that people believe it, but our journals are becoming more and more limited in what space they allow you. So you compress and you compress and you compress. And the thing I've run across recently, and it's actually over the chemistry field, is the journals limit them to a certain amount of space and characters, but they allow them infinite space in a supplementary web presence. And you have to go back and forth between the article and the web presence. So the journals have a different purpose than your dissertation. Your dissertation is to tell the story of your development of knowledge and to show people how you can communicate the development of that knowledge. Your dissertation and your master's thesis is not just archival, but it's tutorial. It's what your professor will hand to the student coming along behind you to learn how to move and be successful in this area, to duplicate what you've done and then move beyond it. And so, to take it to the extreme, the idea of using multiple articles for your dissertation, to my idea, you just write up a one page and say, go read these articles, I'm done. I mean, because if you're just duplicating the article, and it's frustrating to me as a director of a program, because I read every thesis and dissertation.
Which is highly unusual, by the way. Most directors of programs / department heads don't read every thesis or dissertation.
My wife will
Yeah.
tell you that I'm crazy, but that's all right. I knew that already. But the fact of the matter is that when you write your first paper, it's early in your development of your ideas. And then you do more work and you write another incremental paper that is capturing that bit of knowledge and another. By the time you get 3 or 4 years downstream, if you go back and read your first paper, it's not that you're going to necessarily disagree with it, but it's certainly not going to be the evolved knowledge. It will be an early state of your knowledge.
Ken? Is there a question portion to your
I'm sorry,
commentary?
I will say,
I'm sorry, I just thought there was supposed to be a question in there, and I wasn't.
The question is, why do you allow that to happen? Okay, but that's
Okay.
not one I'm expecting to happen.
well, currently, I want all of you to remember that across disciplines on this campus, there are very different viewpoints on what can. The graduate school, we are currently very neutral on this because we understand that micro EP is going to be completely different than creative writing or someone over in animal science.
I think the difficulty that we're facing here in terms of self-plagiarism is, number one, the writing style for journals is so different than the writing style for dissertation. It's almost impossible to take stuff from a journal article and plunk it in and it read correctly for dissertation. If you're
This is definitely true, and something that we often point out to students when they are using the published papers format and they're concerned about submitting it to journals later and afterwards is that 99% of journals are not going to accept the first draft of the article that you submit that's a chapter from your thesis or dissertation. You're gonna have to go through the peer review process. You'll probably have a lot of edits. So in some cases, the goal of doing the published papers format is to prepare a student for submitting articles and to have chapters that could be further edited and pared down that would at a later point in time be acceptable for a journal article, but their faculty wants them to kind of move in that direction, and that's where you go. But it is important to understand that, you know, journals, they're not gonna, I mean, is anything accepted on a first draft? I mean, rarely, if ever. So usually by the time you get to the point of whatever you've worked on for your chapters of your dissertation that your committee has edited and, you know, other people that you have, and you get from that end point with the chapter of your dissertation to the end point with the journal after you've gone through the peer review process, after your professor has been like, hey, remember that conversation or those tables that you did? Why don't you put those in there too? Because I think they really illustrate this point really well. I mean, you know, but by the time you get from A to B, A being your dissertation, B being the journal article, there's a lot of difference
I got a real question.
in the middle there. Yes.
Not so much, a real question. And this is based on this last one that we just went through. So he had one published article, he had three, if I remember, submitted articles, but they were in the process of this. And yet they were submitted for publication, and had there been nothing. So what we ended up doing was saying, identify this chapter is the article submitted for publication to this journal as of this date. And in the meanwhile, he was having the communications.
Right.
But I said, lock it down.
Yes.
Yep.
Now, was that the correct thing to do?
Correct.
That is completely correct, because once you submit your thesis or dissertation, you can't make any changes to it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at some point you have to be done so you can send it to review, to your committee for review so that you can defend and actually graduate. So,
Which is why you should always spell check your title. Because once you submit it,
Yeah.
it's locked in there forever, ever.
yeah. So if you wanted to change something in your thesis or dissertation, let's say it's the week after the deadline, well, essentially what you're doing if you want to make changes, let's say that go into the next semester, is you're pushing your graduation back. Because your thesis or dissertation is your final degree requirement for your program. And you have to complete all of your degree requirements to receive your degree. So a handful of master's students, you know, may still have coursework in their final semester. Doctoral students rarely, if ever, do. But so that's something also to consider. Like you do have to sign something saying that, yes, I reviewed everything in my thesis or dissertation and it's correct and I'm not going to make any further changes. But making changes is changing something that's a part of your degree requirements, so it can push it off. So we do recommend very thorough reading, including your title. Something that a lot of people are unaware of is that in Microsoft Word, when things are in all caps, it doesn't spell check.
Really?
Really.
Unless you go in and click some little obscure box somewhere
you have
real
to
deep in.
specifically do that. So there's been a lot of misspellings, titles, headings, chapter titles, any kind of heading you put in all caps because, yeah.
So if it's all caps, you have to find some obscure box and say spell check all caps.
Yes, because otherwise it does not. And you know what I usually tell students is you see what you expect to see. You've been looking at your work for months, years,
Decades.
hopefully not.
You and your committee.
You and your committee. So you see what you expect to see. You know what your title is. You know what it's supposed to say. So to you, when you look at it, that's what it says, because you've looked at it 1,000 times over the last 6 months, 6 years, however long. And so that's how come we also advise, if possible, have someone who has nothing to do with your thesis or dissertation look it over.
Take it to the Writing Center.
Yeah, the Quality Writing Center in Kimple, they are great. We've worked with them, in tandem with working with students, to resolve issues, and they are very helpful. But just having someone who doesn't know, like, okay, I don't know what half the words in this title mean, but I know that word and that's not spelled right.
Now, the one time that we will take a paper back after the deadline, but it will still affect your graduation, is not for you find something you wrote wrong in the middle, like you misspelled a word or something like that. If there's an instance of plagiarism, we will remove your paper from ProQuest, but we'll also push your graduation to the next semester. So make sure that you work with your committee to look at your paper to make sure there's not any plagiarism in it. Yes, sir.
I think I must have heard you wrong. If plagiarism is detected in a thesis or dissertation after it's been submitted, you allow it to be resubmitted?
Typically, if it's within a few days, yes. We will pull it from back. We'll let them fix it if it's before the graduation date.
Isn't that in violation of our academic honesty?
It matters the minute, it matters the time.
Well, there's variety, because sometimes a student says, I uploaded this previous copy and not the actual final copy,
Okay.
and I left out these citations. I know that I left this stuff out. Can I please resubmit it? Because it is plagiarism if you don't have those citations in there, but you know that you did that. And again, you probably have 10 copies of your thesis or dissertation.
And we will not be the ones making that judgment call. We'll actually take it to Dr. Koski,
Yeah.
who would typically take it to the dean and say, here's what's going on. Do we allow this to come back?
Academic integrity monitor.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. So typically those situations, we work with Dr. Koski, our associate dean, and with the student and with the student's committee members to resolve the issue.
I just wanted to make
And-
sure nobody had
yes.
the idea, oops, I got caught, but it's only 3 days after the submission
Yes.
deadline. I'll fix
Yes.
it.
The only time we've actually ever had that happen, someone accidentally uploaded the wrong version
Right.
of their paper.
Yeah, that's
And that's the smart thing to do, to allow the substitution. I agree with that.
right, exactly. Especially in an instance when a student has caught something themselves. I think that's about.
Are y'all going to mention turn it in at all as being available to the graduate students? Or is that a separate topic entirely?
I kind of feel like that's a separate topic entirely.
But it sure fits in with this one. I mean, can you just announce, can I just announce that it exists and it is possible for them to get to it?
Yes,
There is a very good plagiarism checking tool
that some people like and some people don't.
that some people do. And there's also one embedded in Learn. It's a Safe Assign. Safe Assign is a tool you have available that you can access as a student right now. Turn It In is, I feel, a much better tool for understanding what it finds, but a faculty member would have to set up a pseudo class for you to submit a paper to. So it would take the faculty members involved.
Typically, a faculty member will contact Dr. Koski and said, are you willing to do this for me?
Right.
Is our policy right now.
But it is, the license is owned by the graduate school and is available to all faculty and graduate students. So, turnitin.com.
Well, I think that's all we have. Does anybody have any other questions? Just so you know, we do have a really great commencement and graduation website that we updated last fall. We have some flyers on the food table, and it has a graduation checklist on it. So there's one for every semester. They do change from semester to semester because dates are different and things like that. So there's one for spring, tells you dates things are due, things you need to make sure and do, and different things like that. The guide to theses and dissertations is also on that page, as well as there's some drop-down menus, so you can look specifically, like if you're a master's student doing a thesis, if you're a master's student doing a non-thesis, to look at the different forums and different things that you need to do as you go through your program.
Guide to thesis and dissertations.
What?
And also on that webpage is what's called the Guide to Thesis and Dissertations. It is the rule book for submitting your thesis or dissertation. It changes almost every semester. So if you're 2 or 3 semesters out right now, don't go download it and just use that. Keep going back to the website and looking at the new, because we could have new policies, we could have new clarifications, we could have things that make it a little bit easier. What we do as the grad school is we take the library's policies and our publishing company's policies and we put them together in this guide. So there are rules in there that we can't budge on because they're other people's rules. We try to work with students as much as possible with things, but just understand that there are some things in that guide that are difficult to budge on. So read it thoroughly. It's actually set up, the front matter is set up like a thesis or dissertation. So if you're a visual person like me, you can kind of see how your paper, the beginning part of your paper should flow. Okay?
There's the most common form of plagiarism, from stupid plagiarism, at least in the science and engineering field, is still a student grabbing the boilerplate information from a research group's website and not feeling it has to be cited. So I just wanted to throw that in. Anything on the web is a published document. So just because it's on the web, and if you search for that same information, do a Google search for a sentence, and you find it all over the web where people have illegally plagiarized it, that doesn't mean it's okay for you to use without citation. And that is the most common stupid mistake, but it is plagiarism. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Very good point.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for coming today. We definitely try and talk about theses and dissertations whenever we can, and plagiarism and copyright is definitely a big issue that a lot of students worry about. So our goal is to educate students and make them more comfortable. So we're always available, email, or you can come by our office. We have some of our business cards also on the table. So if you have questions about something, or you think about something later, or you're working on your dissertation and you have a question about, like, oh, I'm working on this and maybe I need to do something extra or something like that, please feel free to call us or email us. We're always happy to help.